All right, everybody, welcome to another Digital Dungeon Master video. This is let's talk about RPGs. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you all about the ever famous Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. Where do I start with Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition? Now, I know that one thing is for certain, and as you can see behind me on my shelf, I own every single D&D 4th edition product. Every single one. From the 44 core books, to all of the modules, to the 9 modules that make up the Orcus storyline. I own all of the D&D layer assaults, all of the D&D encounter seasons. I own it all. I have it all. And I don't regret one bit of it. And I know I'm in the minority when I say that I like Dungeons and Dragons in 4th edition. And I think that's, and I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. 4th edition is really a great edition. And I don't want to get into all the edition wars and, oh, Dave, 4th edition is sorry, and it's a video game. And that is like the worst excuse I've ever heard for someone saying they don't like an RPG game. I mean, honestly, it's, and like I said, I'm brutally honest, it's moronic. So let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. Man, so much stuff to talk about. So back at this point, I believe it was the middle of 2008-ish when D&D 4th edition was released. And I remember all 3 core books released at the same time, meaning the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. And I remember this. And at this point in time, I was really not playing D&D. Honestly, I hadn't, and in fact, wow, it had probably been about 8 years since I had played D&D. Because at this point in time, in 2008, we were in the wonderful era of mass multi online role-playing games, or MMORPGs. I was playing 3. I was in a group, I was in a guild that we played 3 different online games. We played EverQuest. We were, actually there was about 4, because we were dabbling in EverQuest 2 as well. We were playing religiously Dark Age of Camelot, which is probably the best PvP game of all time, and probably still is, even though it's been out for almost 20 years. Dark Age of Camelot is probably still one of the best PvP games out there. And then we were also playing a newer role-playing game that came out probably about a year before 4E, which was Lord of the Rings Online. And I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I even took college courses, Tolkienology college courses at the University of Central Florida, and the community college that I went to that dove all into Tolkien. And those were awesome classes. So it was the age of the MMO. And, you know, MMOs are still out there. They're still popular. But I don't think MMOs are as popular as they were back in the middle 2000s. So, yeah, I was playing EverQuest. We were playing most of all Dark Age of Camelot. But we were raiding between these 4 games. And once an expansion came out for another one, we'd play it, beat all the content, go to another, and we just rotate between those 4 games, basically. And that's what I was doing in 2008. I was taking a break from, you know, rolling dice. Although I missed it, but I just, as being a raid, I was a raid leader. So I had to learn all the encounters, do all the, I had to do all the legwork on trying to find out how to beat these bosses. And it was a lot of time. It took a lot of time to do this. So I didn't have a lot of time. But I did know that 4th edition was released, and I did pick up the core books. And the first thing that I really loved about D&D 4th edition was the art. I loved the art. All of the art was matching. I mean, it seems like they had the same few artists that were doing all of the art in the Monster Manual, the core, and, the other 2 core books, the DMG and the Player's Handbook. And I liked it. And I fell in love with the Dragonborn, man. I fell in love with the Dragonborn. I loved it. So, at this time, I was playing MMOs, not doing any dice rolling. And when I was looking at Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition compared to the other editions, 3.5, also 2nd edition, classic, and 1st edition, hopefully, and I'm thinking from a humanistic point of view here, an evolution. D&D 4th edition, it evolved. It evolved away from basic, 1st, 2nd, 3.5, and 4. Sorry I'm not mentioning 3, but that was just a sliver in time as to all the other editions. So this game, 4th edition, this reiteration of the game that I loved, it evolved a lot. I mean, it had evolved so much. I mean, whether it be, back when I first started playing in 84-ish, there were no feats. There were no ability score improvements. There were no powers. There were no backgrounds. There was nothing like there was in past editions. Well, in previous editions past where I was playing in basic. So I actually really liked the way that D&D 4th edition was set up. And I remember looking through the Player's Handbook with the Warlord and the Ranger and the Cleric. And I just remember looking through pages and pages and pages and pages of each class. Whether it be any of the classes that I loved. And the first one that I went to was the Cleric and the Paladin and the Fighter. Those are the 3 classes that I looked at. And when I saw 20 pages of 25 pages for each class, I'm going, holy cow, this is amazing. Because, I mean, even in, there was 1 page for the Cleric and, basic D&D, and maybe a couple pages in 1st edition. And even in 5th edition, there's 2 pages? But when you look through that 4th edition Player's Handbook, and like I said, the Cleric, Fighter, Paladin, there was so much customization for characters. And I was like, I just instantly, I fell in love with it. I was like, man, this is amazing. And now I'm wanting to get away from MMOs, but I couldn't because of the commitment that I had. But wow, it was awesome. From a player standpoint, there was so much customization. And that's even at the beginning of life for D&D 4th edition. And over time, throughout the entirety of D&D 4th edition, and I'll talk about this later on with stuff that I really like about 4th edition, but there are 44 hardbacks came out in the line of D&D 4th edition. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of ways to customize your cleric or your fighter or your vampire, whatever you wanted to create, your shaman. And these are in later, Player Handbook 2, Player Handbook 3, druids. I mean, so many special classes that were never seen before. Except for, I would say probably in the Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition class books. I think a lot of the 4th edition stuff was I probably come from with inspiration from second edition. 3.5 had a lot of stuff as well, but not like second edition. So, but for players, man, D&D was awesome. So the next thing that I noticed about Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition was, and this is what really frustrates me when people tell me they hate Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. And when people say they hate Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, these folks have never probably read one sentence out of the Dungeons and Dragons player handbooks or the essential stuff. These people have probably never read anything about 4th edition, and they just go off, oh, I just hate with it because it's a video game. It just makes it feel like a video game. And I hate that. That is the biggest ridiculous moronic statement that I've ever heard. And I'm sorry if I hurt anybody's feelings, which I'm not meaning to do, but if you don't take the time to invest into a game to find out if you're going to like it or not, just don't go by hearsay from what these people are putting on websites. Seriously, find out for yourself. Common sense, right? But I think a lot of things with, these blog websites that nobody watched, maybe 5 people, like my website, 5 people, I think word of mouth really hurt 4th edition. And, yeah. I think word of mouth hurt 4th edition. That was one of the things that hurt 4th edition. But I also have a couple of other things that I think go hand in hand with that as to why, and I'll talk about that later. But yes, D&D 4th edition evolved. Okay, it evolved. It evolved massively from 1st edition, 2nd edition, and in fact, 4th edition is not a hard game to play. I mean, it's a simple game to play. The rules are not... There's a lot less rules in D&D 4th edition than there is in D&D 3.5. And if you're familiar with the two rule sets, I know you'll agree with me. But there's a lot less rules in D&D 4th edition. A lot more character customization and a lot less rules. But yes, the game for Dungeons and Dragons in 4th edition, it is more tactical. And I totally admit that. And I will say that. It is a more tactical game compared to the other versions of D&D. But it doesn't make it a video game. I mean, for Christ's sake, video games are so fluid. It's non-stop movement. It's WASD and attack buttons. There's nothing like that in D&D 4th edition, so come on. Quit saying 4th edition is a video game, because it's not. Holy cow, that really chaps me when I hear people say that. And it's these people are the ones that have probably never read 4th edition. So, yes, it is more tactical. But it's nothing like a video game. So, I mean, yeah, it's just crazy. The character customization, like I said, is crazy. You got 55 races, and I took some notes here. There's 55 races in 4th edition. There's 77 classes. There's 800 plus backgrounds. There's 9,400 plus powers for all of the classes. 9,400 powers. There's 577 Paragon paths, which are level 11 to 20. There's 115 Epic Destiny lines from 21 to 30, because it is a level 30 game. And then there's 10,000 plus magic items. Why would you not like to have that kind of, variety for a game? And I'm just talking, I haven't even got into the magic that 4th edition is for Dungeon Masters. I haven't even touched that yet. But man, character customization was so awesome. Like I said, it was spread out between 44 books, 44 hardbacks. And but the game was so easy to play. And there's no difference between 5th edition and 4th edition, excluding the ways that attacks of opportunity are taken. That's really about the only thing mechanically that's different between D&D 4th edition and D&D 5th edition. I mean, all of the powers, they're cut and dry. I mean, it's so there's no confusion with reading a power in Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. So if you have Reaping Strike for the fighter, it tells you attack plus strength versus armor. Or if it's something from a magic user, it's attack plus intelligence or charisma, depending on the class that you're playing, versus will reflex, or versus reflex or willpower, or anything else. It tells you. It's so straightforward. I mean, there's no goofing it up. I mean, the powers are just crazy. And I'm going to get back to powers in just a second. So it's all attack plus strength versus defense. And then for the damage, it has the damage there. There's no guessing. There's no looking up, these effects or powers or anything, because everything is right there on the power, the stat block for the power. And there were powers that you could use every single round. There were powers that were encounter powers that you could use once per encounter, or maybe something like a healing word you could use twice an encounter. And then there were daily powers, which ridiculous amounts of damage. So, Power Strike, I'm just kind of going off of off my head. I think Power Strike was like a 5 weapon damage attack. So if you were using your handy dandy longsword, which was a D8, it would do 5 D8 weapon damage plus your strength. And it was so clear cut on what to do for each power. And that's what I really liked about it. Another thing that I really, and I'm going to get back to powers. Another thing that I really loved about 4th edition was, it was a new mechanic. It was a whole new type of thing to do in Dungeons and Dragons. And these are called skill challenges. And what a skill challenge is it promoted group play. I mean, it definitely promoted group play. And I will kind of say this, all right? Skill challenges weren't exactly explained correctly in the player's handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide. There were explanations for skill challenges and example skill challenges and everything, but later on in the life of D&D, Mike Mearls put out about a 6 to 8 article series in Dragon magazine explaining in a better way how to run skill challenges. And then when D&D Essentials came out, which was sort of like the last hurrah, and I'm going to get to Essentials as well, skill challenges were explained a lot better in that reiteration of 4th edition. So that was sort of like D&D Essentials, and I'll kind of touch on it now. D&D Essentials was like edition 4.5. I mean, it came out around 2010, 12-ish there. A lot of things were reworked, but I'll get into that. I've got so much other stuff I want to talk about D&D 4th edition. But the skill challenge, it was awesome, and it promoted role play. It promoted your group performing a task as a group using all of your different skill checks to close the portal before the orc army comes out of, the Shadowfell. Or are you going to take a camp for the night? Okay, let's set up camp in this room. This is like Moria, where there are just monsters everywhere. So let's do a skill challenge to make sure that you hide yourself properly and set up defenses properly and do not have an encounter. So there's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different skill challenges that you can do. And Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine did a great job in the later part of 4th edition explaining skill challenges, which I think the team at Wizards acknowledged that the original explanation for skill challenges wasn't that great. So that's why Mike did his 6 or 8 article, issues with explaining how skill challenges were meant to work. But skill challenges were amazing. And there you go. Oh, you don't role play. I've heard this before. Oh, you don't role play in 4th edition. Well, skill challenges promoted role play. And in fact, I'm going to be honest, I don't know why skill challenges were not put in 5th edition. Because by this point, Wizards of the Coast had hammered out the details on explaining how to do and how to implement these skill challenges into your game. So I have no clue why they didn't add skill challenges into 5th edition, but I have a thought. Maybe it was because they wanted to just distance themselves as far away as possible from 4th edition when they were creating their new D&D Next Edition or D&D 5th edition. So that's something that I thought of. But the skill challenges, I've actually done skill challenges in 5th edition. And I never once got a complaint, and the players like them. So surprise, it's from D&D 4th edition. Advantage and disadvantage. Surprise, where is that from? 4th edition. It's just not called advantage and disadvantage. How it's worded on powers is like this. You attack twice, and you take the better roll. Or you attack twice, and you take the worst roll. That's advantage and disadvantage. So it's nothing new. It's been around. And in fact, I think in even 3.5, there were some features with the classes that would do advantage and disadvantage as well. But it was predominantly from D&D 4th edition. There are many powers that you would attack twice, especially with the utility powers. You would attack twice, take the best, or do a skill check, take the best roll, or roll twice and take the worst roll. That's just how the power was. Or the power would allow you to give an NPC advantage or disadvantage, or another one of your players advantage and disadvantage. So, I mean, the powers were so well worded, it was amazing. And I love the powers in D&D 4th edition. But the skill challenges, that was another great thing about D&D 4th edition. And this goes along the line, I've already mentioned it. People say, oh, it's a video game and there's no role play. And are you kidding me? That's what skill challenges promoted. There was an entire chapter, I think it might, and I'm kind of guessing here, but I think it might be chapter 8 in the player's handbook. What book does an entire chapter on role playing? D&D 4th edition did an entire chapter on role playing. And then whenever the second edition of 4th edition came out, not to confuse you there, but D&D Essentials, in the core book for that, there was also another full chapter on role-playing. So if you've played D&D, if you didn't get the role play out of it, if you didn't get the role play from skill challenges, I'm sorry, you were given a disservice by the dungeon master that you had running that game. Because roleplay was promoted in D&D 4th edition. So to say that, hopefully you read the book. If you make that comment, if you don't, go back and read the book, because 4th edition does promote role-playing. So skill challenges and a whole entire chapter dedicated to role-playing your character, how to use your skill checks, persuasions, your streetwise checks, etc. So, and in fact, we're getting into I'm going to start getting into the dislikes here pretty soon. But another couple of things that I really loved about D&D 4th edition was and this is later on. This is something I've got some notes that I had to take notes over the last week thinking of this. Another great thing that I love about 4th edition is it was made for Fantasy Grounds. Because like I said, 4th edition is a more tactical version of D&D compared to previous editions. So it could get a little bit confusing with powers, and I'm going to get into the disadvantages and the dislikes that I have about 4th edition. But Fantasy Grounds and 4th edition, they go hand in hand, and they are a match made in heaven. Because if you're playing pure D&D 4th edition, the effects on powers can get a little daunting. So, meaning you can have ongoing damage. And at the beginning of the round, the monster with the ongoing damage has to do a d20 saving throw. Fails it, takes the damage. Okay? Effects, you can, especially with more books coming out just on powers like martial powers and divine powers and stuff like that. When you come out with 200-page splat books, you got to have these pages full. So yes, some of the powers did become pretty ridiculous. Like, okay, you can attack with your weapon, you can give this person a healing surge, and then you can give your uncle's second cousin's sister's brother's roommate a +3 to your intelligence modifier on their next attack or their next skill check. So when you start getting into that kind of, I want to call it clutter for powers, I think that's what hurt D&D 4th edition, was the sheer amount of effects on powers and the difficulty that it was to track them. Because even when I played 4E around the table for a little bit, we would forget to do our ongoing damage. We would forget to do our saving throws. We would forget to use that modifier that we were given, from 3 other groups away, just having a little fun there. And so I think that's what hurt 4th edition with the powers. But we'll come back to that. But using Fantasy Grounds and 4th edition, holy cow, it keeps track of everything. It does the saves automatically. It does the ongoing damage automatically. It does, you add that little, you add the little pendant effect to whatever player you want to give that bonus to, and it takes it into consideration, and it does it automatically. And as a DM, no token tool sets needed, no class tool sets needed. That's another great thing that I loved about 4th edition, was that it just worked perfect for D&D 4th edition. And, another thing that I liked is you could play it as a tactical game. You don't have to role play in D&D 4th edition. Just because I say that it's a disservice to where, it's a video game, it's a trap, there's no role playing. I mean, you can play the game as a tactical game. I mean, especially with all of the different accessories out, the tile packs, the modules and everything, the way that the encounters are set up, you can just go from encounter to encounter and forget everything, and you can technically play it as a tactical board game. And I've seen people play it that way, and it still looks to be fun. But for me, I like to have role play in my games. And, but especially if you're going to play it full blown, oh man, especially on Fantasy Grounds, it's awesome. And around the table, you can play it as well. There's so many tools and accessories that can be used to help play 4th edition that a lot of people don't know about. But, I mean, it's just so diverse as well. I mean, another thing that I loved about D&D 4th edition was it just wasn't set in, and in fact, the default setting for D&D 4th edition is called the Nenter Vale. And it's about a 250 mile by 250 mile area. And I thought it would probably be Forgotten Realms, like, most of the other editions, they promoted Forgotten Realms a lot. But of course, there were tons of other box sets for Al-Qadim and Lankmar and all these other places. But 4th edition did something new. They I think it was Mike Merle's brainchild, the Nenter Vale. And like I said, it's 250 miles by 250 miles, and it is just jam-packed, full of locations, full of lore, and all that other good stuff. So the diversity. And, with these 44 hardbacks, there were other settings that came out. There was a Forgotten Realms player's book, a Forgotten Realms campaign guide. There was an Eberron player's guide and an Eberron dungeon master's guide. There's Dark Sun. So not only was there the Nentir Vale, which I really liked, and that's where all the modules took place, was inside of the Nentir Vale. There was Eberron, there was Forgotten Realms, there's Dark Sun. There was a Dungeon magazine and had a massive campaign, the Chaos campaign. What was that? It's on the tip of my tongue. And then it brought back into the Nentir Vale. There was another area towards the western part of the map where they incorporated all of the D&D encounter stuff, like Keep on the Borderlands stuff. And they broke that up into 5 modules. And yeah, it was just, there was so much content for the Nentir Vale. I really liked it. And my mind is going blank. I should have wrote this stuff down, but when I was thinking of it, I was like, I don't need to really. The Chaos Scar, that's it. Chaos Scar series as well. That was amazing. I mean, there was just so much content that was in Dungeon magazine. And that's another thing that was great, because not only are there the primary products, but there was also a 4th edition campaign series. I think it was by, what is that RPG site? They created a Zeitgeist campaign, and it was for 4th edition. So 4th edition wasn't OGL, so it wasn't like every company was just pouring out products. There's no DM's Guild. There's no 3.5 license that you could just mass produce like there is now for D&D 5e and 3.5. 4th edition was like you had to have a license, and I believe I think it was N-World, but N-World had a campaign, whole campaign, officially licensed campaign called Zeitgeist. So that was cool. But the market wasn't flooded, and that's what I also, now that I look back at D&D 4e, I like that the market wasn't just flooded with every single company in the RPG industry just mass producing content for 4th edition. So there are some third-party books. I know Kobold Press put out a couple. There was a Zeitgeist by N-World. But there wasn't really a whole lot. I know Dave Arnson had done Blackmore for D&D 4th edition under his little license and stuff. So yeah, it was good. So the content was there and the diversity was there. It just wasn't the Nentir Vale. So you could go and pick up the campaign book or the player's book, and you could incorporate those settings into D&D 4th edition too. So that was cool. But the support. And this is what I really miss, not only about this is what I miss in general from Wizards of the Coast. I miss Dragon Magazine and I miss Dungeon Magazine. And I know there's the Dragon Plus app or whatever it is, but it's not the same. Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine was a monthly publication. It ran for decades. And right before D&D 5th edition released, I remember when Chris Perkins, which was head of Dungeon, I believe it was Dungeon or Dragon, I remember he did his farewell article, and he says, well, we're in the transition period from D&D 4th edition to 5th edition, and we're going to take a break from Dungeon and Dragon magazine. When I read that article, I about cried, because I knew it was probably never going to come back. I could just kind of feel that Dungeon and Dragons life had just come to an end. And it's unfortunate because Dragon Magazine had so much lore for the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons and so many monster remakes and all kinds of lore on different settings. Dungeon Magazine had nothing but an entire 100 and some page PDF or book that was just full of nothing but adventures. Like take for instance the Chaos Scar series for D&D 4th edition. I mean, that went on for years, and it was amazing. So that was another great support that D&D 4th edition had, I really miss Dungeon and Dragon magazine, and I don't think we'll ever see them again. And I think we're stuck with that Dragon Plus. And the thing is, it's an app. I don't do apps, so I don't get the use out of it. And it's not online, so you can't just fumble through it online. It's an app. So, man, but I do miss, with the end of the life of 4th edition, we also lost Dungeon and Dragon magazine, and that's just super, super sad. But I can understand why, because it probably took so much effort to create those with art, adventure coordinations, and so I can see it, but it's still sad to see them go, and I miss them. So I talked about what was good for players. And now I want to talk about how Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition was awesome for DMs. And I'm going to just go right out and say this, but Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition is a dungeon master's dream. I mean, a dream for the ease of use on material. Everything is just set up so beautifully for Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition and Dungeon Masters. I mean, everything from the lore to areas, everything is broken up. Everything, all of your skill checks, it talks about, hey, let's use these skill checks here. All of the skill checks are highlighted so you can actually see them in the content. There's all kinds of great public dialogue that are in boxes. And this is like this in other editions as well. But where it really shines is where it sets up all of the encounters. Whether it be a role-playing encounter, whether it be a tactical combat encounter, whether it be a role-playing encounter, whether it be a skill challenge encounter. I mean, it's just set up so beautifully. All the correct DCs, all of the different skill checks used in skill challenges, how to run it, how many successes you need before you fail, or how many failures you get and then you fail. And here's what happens if you fail the skill challenge. Here's what happens if you succeed. Here's what happens if you fails. I mean, everything is just, it's just set up beautifully. Encounters for combat. It talks about, all right, here's the tiles that you want to use, or here's the map that you want to use, or here's the map from the module. And then it breaks the maps up into encounter area. And then it has here's the monsters. Here's the tactics for the monsters. These are the tactics that these monsters will use. These different monsters will go around and flank. This controller monster will try to control and take your casters out of the equation. I mean, it's set up so perfectly. And everything is labeled. And, here's all the magic items that are in. Here's the treasure. And I love tables. Don't get me wrong, I'm old school D&D. I love to roll on tables, but D&D 4th edition isn't like that. It says, here's how much gold you have, here's how many gems, here's pieces of art, here's your magic items. It's already done for you. I mean, D&D 4th edition is set up, it's a DM's dream, it really is. It has all the maps, it has everything, all the locations on where the monsters are, the hidden, just like all the other maps, but it goes into more detail in D&D 4th edition. That's what I really loved about it. But it is really set up as a dungeon master's dream. It's so organized. And there's so much content out there for you as a DM. Like I said, there's 44 hardbacks. And there's 5,300 monsters. There's more than 5,300 monsters in D&D 4th edition. And the way that I loved, and the way that I noticed that the monsters were set up is just beautiful. There's just not a boring challenge rating 1/8 kobold or a challenge rating 1/2 wing kobold. There's probably 50 kobolds in D&D 4th edition, probably even more. There's kobolds for every single level from 1 to level 30, and then there's like kobold ultimate lords and stuff that are like in the middle of the high 30s. So there's so much diversity when it comes to monsters. I mean, there are just monsters everywhere in D&D 4th edition. And it was awesome. There's 10,000 plus magic items in D&D 4th edition. You know, you got your handy dandy longsword. It can be +1 to +6. So there's just 6 magic swords right there. And then there's magic items for every single weapon, +1 to +6. And then there's all the different effects. Like, you know, there's a brutal, like a vicious longsword or the bleeding longsword. And then there's +1 to 6 versions of most likely all of those items as well. So, man, it was so great with the amount of variety that there was. Even though there was, you know, it was the same item, +1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or some were just items were +3, 4, or 4, 5, 6. There was so much variety. I mean, there's 3 books of magic items. There's Mordenkainen's Emporium. There's also Adventurer Vault 1 and Adventurer Vault 2. And then in all the player handbooks 1, 2, 3, there's chapters of magic items. There's magic items in all of the other books. Oh, magic items are everywhere. And that's what people like. And, you know, especially when I started really diving into 4th edition, that was one thing that I really loved was all of the monsters, the variety. I didn't have to, if I wanted to run a higher level adventure, level 10, level 12, I didn't have to modify all these creatures to make them, you know, these lower level creatures like the orcs, the kobolds, the goblins. I didn't have to rework them. They were already there. And monsters scaled so well, and monsters were brutal in D&D 4th edition. Monsters were brutal. They really were. The game was definitely much more difficult, especially at the higher levels, because the monsters would scale. Monsters would have, you know, 30, 40, 50 armor class. They'd have +40, +50 to hit. And another thing about D&D, it's big numbers. It's like 3.5, big numbers, but without all the rules that 3.5 had. So big numbers, it was awesome. I think players love to see big numbers and, oh, wow, I'm doing 7 weapon damage and stuff like that. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's pretty awesome. But it was so awesome. There's so many monsters, so many magic items. You know, they introduced the use of terrain, like if you're on this rock cliff, maybe there's some lava pools. You could add those in there. You could add in like random lightning strikes. But there were all kinds of terrain. And there was like hundreds of different possible terrain types as well that you can add into your encounters, which to me it was new because I don't ever remember that happening in any of my games in previous editions. So, and then the sheer amount of traps and the way to modify traps. There were like 600 different base traps, with, you know, all these different ways to modify them. And I mean, there were tons of poisons and diseases, and it was a DM's dream, and it was all organized for you. And to create monsters, it told you how to create monsters. Step 1, it wasn't a guessing game for numbers. It told you how to create monsters. It told you how to create the traps. It told you, you know, if you want a medium level DC, here's what you want to do. Here's the damage that you want. Here's how you want the players to find it, disarm the trap, etc. I mean, it was so DM friendly, and I loved it. You know, and another great thing about D&D 4th edition, was the public play systems. You know, when 4th edition first came out, they had these little one-page adventures called Delve Nights. And I have the Delve Nights back there. And in fact, I want to thank Sci-Fi City for selling me all of the Delve Nights, all of the Encounter series, and all of the Layer Assaults. I want to thank Sci-Fi City in Orlando for that, because years ago, when I was really into 4th edition, I wanted to run this public play stuff, and the manager in there sold me all the public play stuff for, it was $10 per packet. So even though it ended up being a lot of money, I spent a couple $100 in there, but I got all of the public playtest stuff. And, you know, first there was Delve Night. It lasted, I think, about 7 or 8 different Delve Nights, and then they discontinued it because I don't think they thought it was enough to get people to come in and play public play in your local game store. So then they came out with D&D Encounter series. with like the March of the Phantom Brigade, the Search for Halaster's Lost Apprentice, Keep on the Borderlands, and these were beautiful. The public playtest now with D&D Adventurers League does not compare anything compared to D&D Layer Assault, D&D Encounter Series, because it's all digital now. And I mean, it's great content. Adventurers League is great content, don't get me wrong. But I'm talking from a physical standpoint. There is no more physical products that they send to the game stores. And I think that kind of hurts the game stores in a way. But I think that's probably why they don't do it for D&D 5th edition, is just because of the sheer cost of how much they probably invested into this. Because these products are beautiful. You know, not only did you get a physical book, in Keep of the Borderlands, there were 5 books. You know, there was a Dark Sun trilogy. There were tokens, sheets of tokens. They gave packs of character sheets. They gave pre-made character sheets on these stock cards. I mean, you'll be able to see all that stuff in my subsequent D&D 4th edition What's on Dave's Shelf videos. But just what they gave to the game stores was beautiful. Books, tokens, you know, deck of many things. They gave out all kinds of great utilities to the store that would help promote the game. And yeah, I thank you to Sci-Fi City, because I guess they didn't do public play at that point in time, and I was able to buy all of the public play test stuff, which is actually nowadays pretty expensive if you want to buy those or try to find them on eBay and so I appreciate that. So the public play was, I mean, it was supported awesome. It went from, like I said, a couple of Delve Nights, and then it dove into the encounter seasons. I think there was like 13 encounter seasons. And then between those encounter seasons, they would also kind of splash in these layer assaults, which the layer assaults were just pretty much tactical encounters. But those came with maps. They came with tiles. And not only did the layer assaults, but so did the encounter seasons. Came with multiple fold-out, double-sided, beautiful maps and tokens, and it was cards, character sheets, books of character. I mean, it was amazing how they supported the store, and they just don't do that now. You know, they can I think the store can download the PDF, but that's about it. But there's no more maps and no more tokens and no more card accessories or character sheets or anything like that. You know, unless you know, of course, obviously, if the character sheets, the store would have to print them out. And in the sheer amount of accessories that are available for D&D 4th edition, I mean, you got 44 hardbacks. I mean, look at that. There's a couple hundred books back there for D&D 4th edition. The box sets that came out, the box sets were beautiful. The box sets had, you know, your tokens in them. Your box set had fold-out maps. It had card accessories. Nothing compared to how it is now. Of course, I will say with D&D 5th edition, the new Essentials box set, that is a beautiful box set. That reminds me a lot of the old D&D 4th edition box sets. But I know that Wizards spent a lot of money with these products in 4th edition. So I think that's why they kind of got away from it and, you know, going with a more simple approach with D&D 5th edition is because I don't know if they knew how popular it was going to be, but I don't think they wanted to invest the money that they invested in the D&D 4th edition. But, you know, the box sets are beautiful. All of the books are beautiful. The books have fold-out maps. I can't tell you how many books have fold-out maps. The adventures were put together so beautifully. You get your lore book. You get your encounter book. You get a folder to put them in. You get maps. I mean, beautiful fold-out maps. You know, there's class token packs that all the classes, you know, if you're going to play a fighter, you can go to your game store and pick up a fighter class token pack. It's going to have a miniature in there for you. It's going to have an invisible miniature for you. It's going to have all the different spell effects and stuff that you're going to need for playing a cleric or a mage or whatever. There's a Dungeon Master token set that took care of all of your own going damage in, you know, these beautiful plexiglass tokens that you would just set around the token. So you could see your ongoing damage. You could see you got this effect on you or this other effect, or you're prone or you're bloodied or whatever. So there were so many accessories. I mean, even for the players, you could, if you were going to be playing a fighter out of the player handbook too, you could go to the game store and buy a deck of cards for all of the powers for that class, whether it be if you were going to do martial powers, which were the fighter, the rogue and stuff. You could go and pick up the power cards for that particular class you're going to play. So the game was just supported magnificently. You know, just between, and then all that, there's 3 series of tiles. There's probably 40 tile packs out there. And they used all of those tile packs in the adventures. So when you're running this adventure, here's the tiles that you use from this tile set. And that's what I mean by it was a DM's dream. I mean, sure, you could spend quite a bit of money, but can't you do that with any game that you play? I mean, honestly. So the accessories, man, that was crazy. Players, you know, player had a lot of different variety. You know, it was a DM's dream. But what do you think killed D&D? Here's what I think killed D&D 4th edition. First off, it was the word of mouth. How everybody thought that it was a video game and there's no role playing and etc. Totally bullcrap. It did promote role playing. I've already talked about those. But I think word of mouth and people just not even giving it a chance, I think that really hurt D&D 4th edition. And then I also mentioned the powers part of it. Not the mechanics part. The mechanics of the game were really easy. It was an easier game to play, like I said, than D&D 3.5. A lot less rules. But I think the effects on the massive amount of powers, there's 9,400 plus powers in D&D 4th edition. So yeah, when you're trying to fill up 200-page books for powers, Martial Powers 1, Martial's Powers 2, Divine Powers, Primal Powers, all these other power books, yeah, the powers are going to start getting pretty ridiculous pretty quick. And I think that also hurt too. Just because of the sheer, you know, the power should have been a flavor, you know, the name, the flavor text on what happens, the damage, and then one effect. Not 2 and 3 effects. When you start getting into 2 and 3 effects, ongoing damage, all that stuff gets lost. People get frustrated. And I think that could have led to, yeah, a major hurt for D&D 4th edition. And then I think not staggering the release of the core books also hurt. Because I even went through my player's handbook, the MG, and Monster Manual, and there were probably 150 pages of errata for the 3 core rule books. And I literally went and I printed them. This took so much time to do, but I printed out all the errata, and then I took all of the errata and I glue sticked it into my books over where they wanted you to put the errata. So if it was on page 65, you know, 4th line here, it was crazy. There was so much errata and so many errors on the release of D&D 4th edition. I think that also hurt the game as well. But I think word of mouth was probably the biggest negative impact that it had on D&D 4th edition. So I mentioned D&D Essentials, and D&D Essentials was a very clean version of D&D 4th edition, pure D&D original release. You know, the Essentials line was beautiful, and like I said, it was like an edition 4.5. That's how I see it as. And what it did was it cleaned up. I mean, even before Essentials came out, Monster Manual 3 had came out with all these all these massive changes to monsters. So all the monsters were much more streamlined. It got rid of the massive amount of effects that the Monster Manual 1 and 2 had, and all the base core adventures, and how everything was in first reiteration of the game. So everything was much more streamlined. But I think it was too late. A little too late to, rework all these monsters, even though they did a beautiful job with the monster stat block rework. I mean, they did such a great job. They labeled everything, standard actions, minor actions, features. I mean, it was so beautiful. But it was a little bit too late. And Essentials was a beautiful product. And I have all of the Essential stuff back there. The Monster Vault was amazing. Pogs for every monster in the book. An adventure, with the new monsters. I mean, and it was all set within an interval. The Harkenvold series. That was an amazing adventure series. You could even take that and convert it to 5e and your players would love it. The Harkenvold series. Check it out. Seriously. But D&D Essentials, it also streamlined not only the monsters, but it streamlined the classes. And it got rid of, all of those effects off of the powers. And it made everything so much faster to play. But like I said, I think it was just done way too late. And then they also came out with some other books, like, the options to your rogues and options to this, and the Neverwinter campaign book that had the Sword Mage. And those were all Essentials engineered classes. So it wasn't like going back into the Player's Handbook 1, 2, or 3 and having all of these massive powers, list of powers to choose from. Essentials streamlined it down to where, okay, you can be a two-handed fighter or you can be a sword and board fighter. Sort of like what they did with D&D 5e and the archetypes. You can be a mage or you can be a warlock. Here's, your Hexblade warlock. Here's this type of warlock, your primal warlock. Here's your mages. Here's your evocation mage. Here's a whatever type of mage. Here's here's your rangers. You can be you can have a pet, or you can have a bow, or you can 2-weapon fight. So Essentials really streamlined everything down. And instead of choosing between 20 powers every level, it had 1 or 2 or 3, like 2 or 3 powers or 4 powers to choose from. So it was a much cleaner game in that regard. Although it was compatible with, Pure 4E and Essentials. That was also part of the deal. So if you wanted to use an Essentials class, you could use it in a Pure 4E game. There was no problem there. So, but I think D&D Essentials just came out a little bit too late. About 2011, 2012-ish or so. And then I remember, this was so disheartening. There was going to be a whole Nintervale box set come out. I remember they were going to do an entire Nintervale box set, and then it was canceled, and D&D Next was announced. So that was a bummer. I was really looking forward to that Nintervale Gazetteer box set. Because I really like the Nintervale. There's so much to do in a 250 mile area space. It's not like, the entire land of Faerun, the Forgotten Realms, where it's, the size of the United States, 3,000 by 2,500 miles or whatever it is. So, but the good, lots of player customization, DM's dream, the support that D&D 4th edition had for, all kinds of material, modules, accessories, Dragon Magazine, Dungeon Magazine. The bad, word of mouth, I just don't think people gave it a chance, in my opinion. I really don't think people just gave it a chance. And it's not a video game. It is a more tactical game. Yes, I admit that. I've said that a couple of times. There is role play. The skill challenges were wonderful. And I'm sorry if you experience like that, but your dungeon master did a disservice to you. So that's my opinion on that. And then I think the effects, all of the effects on the powers, the effects on the monsters, I think that hurt D&D 4th edition from a standpoint where it really, really bogged down the game. When you're trying to figure out who's got this effect and who you're going to give this effect to and this ongoing damage and this saving throw. So I think the effects hurt D&D 4th edition as well, but that was solved later on when D&D Essentials came out, when it streamlined the classes, it streamlined the powers, it reworked all of the monster stat blocks, made everything run much more smoother and much more faster. And yeah. So just, the only thing that I say is, before you say something negative about a game, do your due diligence and read about the game first. And I totally respect anybody that has played 4th edition and say they don't like it because of this, this, and this. That's fine. I totally respect that. But when you say you don't like 4th edition and you've never read it or never played it, that's ridiculous. It is. It's really ridiculous. And I do have a soft spot for 4th edition because of all of the negativity that I've read and heard and seen over the years. So yes, I do have a soft spot for 4E, and I do stick up for that edition. But I don't cause addition. I love all versions of D&D. I don't care if it's BECME, basic D&D, 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3.5. I love every single edition of D&D. I don't hate any version. I don't prefer one version of D&D over the other, because I play them all. I mean, hello. I mean, look at all the videos I have. So, but I will say this. I have one story for you guys. When I first started running Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, back in probably 2014, I told my players we were playing D&D 5th edition. At this time, it was D&D Next. And I told them that we were playing D&D 5th edition, or D&D Next, because my players did not like D&D 4th edition. They talked crap about it. And I did a little experiment here. I set up my game, everything, for D&D 4th edition. All the powers, everything. And when my players started playing it, and the viewers as well, I promoted the game in the title as a D&D Next game. Nobody knew the difference between us playing D&D 4th edition, which what we were playing, and D&D Next. And my players, after the fact, I told them we were playing D&D 4th edition, and they were like, wow, that wasn't that bad. I mean, honestly, and they really liked it. And in fact, we continued to play that game for probably a year and a half, every single week, and we got up to level 12 or level 13 in the Paragon levels before the campaign came to an end. And my players would have never had that experience if I didn't pull the wool over their eyes telling them that it was a D&D Next game. They loved the powers. They loved the skill challenges. They had no clue what D&D Next was. They didn't read the playtest packets. They had no clue. They played D&D 4th edition, and they loved it. So sometimes you just got to do something like that, I think. So anyway, everybody, I'm going to end you on this note. I hope you guys, man, I've been rambling on so much about D&D 4th edition. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know down in the comments section what you think of D&D 4th edition. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Have you tried it? Or are you just listening to what everybody else says about D&D 4th edition? I want to know down in the comments section below. So thank you again, everybody, for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, thumbs up the video, and until next time, happy gaming, stay safe, and keep using the awesome Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop program. Bye, everybody.